It's Monday, so Joe Lindsley is with us. Joe, welcome back to TVP World. So, it's been 2 weeks, I believe. So, what's the number?
Hey, Michał, hello from Lviv. I would say, this weekend, on this day, June 19th, Americans recall the emancipation of slaves, Juneteenth Day. And, here in Ukraine, we're reminded every day that this battle between good and evil is ongoing. And over the weekend in Lviv, there were a lot of funerals. The death toll is high. There's a lot of, everyone knows someone who is suffering or getting killed. And as one friend put it here in Lviv, people have been gathering together to divide our common misery in order to keep the spirits high and to keep going. So while the toll is high, the Ukrainians are making, steady, slow progress, it seems. But I also want to report that thanks to our, with the listeners, your audience, we were able to raise enough money to purchase a truck for Vlad, who's a member of our Ukrainian recon unit. And so really, it's fantastic to see that support. And I know that many people have written. Yeah,
that's incredible.
Michał, it's especially important because there was an article by Maria Belinska. She's a very highly regarded. She's been in the Ukrainian military, highly regarded director of an NGO, and she published a story last week that was very brave. She was criticizing. She says we must not be complacent in the efforts for victory here, and this is because sometimes when you read a lot of the press accounts, there's a lot of expectations and pressure on Ukraine's counteroffensive, and Maria wrote, "Defeat begins from the moment when we get hooked on the nice needle of our own propaganda." And then she said, if we don't cover our needs with technology as soon as possible, we will be at the point of the result of making the mistakes that we've been making. She goes on to quote a warrior friend who said, heroes exist because they're the ones that have to correct others' mistakes. And so what specifically she's talking about, and this article really resonated with a lot of soldiers, with a lot of people who are working for Ukraine victory. It needs more simple technology, cheap drones even, in order to push back against the Russians. And, the Russians can, with a cheap drone, destroy very expensive Western military equipment. And while Ukraine needs this equipment...
What does it mean? Could you tell us what does it mean, the cheap drone? Because, what is a cheap drone? What is it used for? Are we talking about the reconnaissance drones, the surveillance drones? Are we talking about the attack drones? And what does it mean, a cheap drone?
Yeah, well, cheap in the sense that they're less money than an Abrams tank, right? So sometimes they're about $500. Others are several $1,000s. In fact, right now we're trying to help a group of an NGO to get a $3,500 drone. Which a Mavic, one of the Mavic drones, but they're used for a variety of purposes. Some of them are simply used for reconnaissance. Others are used to drop bombs, to be lethal. And there's a wide variety of uses. And what Ukrainians have done so well, because this is an existential fight. They have no choice. But B, this is a very tech-savvy nation with great engineering programs. And Ukrainians take relatively cheap drones from $500 to several $1,000s, and they adapt them and make them much more effective and much more lethal. And in fact, I've heard from American sources that there's a possibility that defense contractors in the States might be jealous of Ukrainians.
Yeah, you told us about it, that the cost is too low. Yeah, the cost is too low. Exactly. It's a big business, lots of people to feed all around the world, so you cannot do it too cheap. Anyway, before we move, Joe, so it means that with the help of our viewers, you have managed to get some cash to get SUV for Vlad, a soldier who's fighting this war and is in need of this kind of car. Am I right?
Exactly, and we will report to you as that gets delivered. Some of the process has been delayed because the guy that runs the foundation that is organizing the delivery of the vehicle, his brother-in-law was killed in the fighting. As I've said, the toll is very high right now and very intense. But that's all the more reason why these supplies are urgently needed. And so if anyone wants to support, once again, UkrainianFreedomNews.com, click on support us. And for this, you'd have to click on PayPal, because for drones, they're not eligible for U.S. tax exemption. And so you'd have to donate the money directly on PayPal. But these, as Maria Balinska pointed out in her story, these simple, cheap drones can really save lives. There was a famous Ukrainian hero, Da Vinci, who was killed in Bakhmut, and he didn't even have a thermal vision on his drone. And so if these guys are better supplied, they have a better chance of living and of pushing toward victory.
Joe, what do you make of the information that, actually you mentioned it in a way, that there's a big pressure on Ukraine regarding this counteroffensive, but based on the official reports on what Jens Stoltenberg said, we just quoted his words, we've heard the statements of Antony Blinken, who seemed to be confident that this offensive will steadily move forward. It looks like the Western officials got some info about the progress, slow progress, but progress of the Ukrainian armed forces. But on the other hand, we hear that the losses are big as well. It's not that it's just a piece of cake and walk in the park.
Yeah, and everything I hear from people participating in this, it must inherently be slow and steady. The Russians have had time to prepare. There are landmines. You have to be very careful, and it has to be slow and steady. It's grueling. It's exceedingly difficult. Meanwhile, we had these, the African so-called peace delegation that was quite offensive, I think, to many people here in Ukraine. The president of South Africa came to Kyiv. His press secretary denied that there were Russian strikes on the city, which everyone else heard. And he said that both sides need to de-escalate. And we have to really ask, what does de-escalate mean? It means giving up, it means surrendering. We really have to think about the words we use. Every moment that the Ukrainians are not pushing back, are not getting new supplies, are not fighting, they are de-escalating, and they are letting Russia escalate and move toward victory. And that's what the South African delegation does not seem to realize. And then there was another, Michał, another disturbing...
go on.
Slightly disturbing comment from President.
Go on. We lost you for a second.
President Biden. Great. Sorry for that. President Biden said he was asked by reporters about Ukraine joining NATO. A question reporters love to ask, sort of a pointless question. But President Biden says we're not going to make it easy, and that I'm sort of surprised by that, because this war is not easy.
It really so what is the hard way? If it's not easy, what is the hard way?
This is the very hardest way. And this is, when I look at everyone around me everyone is tired, suffering immensely, still going, but this is extremely difficult. And so sometimes when you see Western leaders and the African leaders lecturing, which is a habit they had before Russia's full-scale invasion. They'd say Ukraine is so corrupt, blah, blah, blah. Actually, I think a lot of times they're covering their own corruption, beat up on the nation that is currently, in a fight for its life. It's easy to try to knock Ukraine down, and so I can push back against that as an American, but Ukrainians are very focused on the daily fight right now.
Joe, you actually mentioned the whole Africa issue. Africa is an important context of this war. Since the beginning of this war, we remember in the United Nations the whole debate about the providing of grains and stopping the grains in the ports of Ukraine on the Black Sea, and the whole idea of this deal made by United Nations. There is a question, or actually this war criminal who is believed to be Vladimir Putin, when he was in Africa, and we quoted this at the beginning of our program, this is Ukraine to blame for not starting the negotiations. What do you make of it?
Well, I think for one, this African delegation, clearly, as South Africa had war games with Russia, clearly they're either, I think they're being bullied by Russia and are afraid of Russia's power. And that shows us, the way Russia attacked Kyiv while the Prime Minister of Egypt and the President of South Africa were in Kyiv. Moscow would never do that if Macron was in Kyiv, or when NATO's in Kyiv. He only bullies Africa this way, and maybe the Africans should wake up and realize he's got zero respect for them, and remember their own struggle for freedom against apartheid, and stand with the people who are actually willing to fight every single day for freedom, instead of smiling and laughing and lecturing them, as the president of South Africa did.
So what is the reason for which we are hearing also, and we quoted NATO Secretary General, it's of course a support for Ukraine and claims that Ukraine got the right to regain as much as territory as needed. But on the other hand, we hear that whatever the number of or the amount of land that the Ukraine is going to regain, it is going to influence the position of Ukraine at the negotiation table. We do not know anything about any negotiation table being prepared, but it looks like they know something that we don't.
Well, I think, yeah, maybe they were speaking on behalf of Moscow and Putin, I think, or maybe they were just grandstanding. But there's nothing about a negotiation table now, and as Ukraine has made clear, nothing can be until the Russians are out of Ukrainian territory, because as soon as you give Russia any space, they're simply going to resupply, as they've done during the winter, resupply, and then, now they're hitting, from May and most of June, they were hitting Kyiv more than they ever have since the beginning of the war, because they had time to re-strategize and resupply. And that's why Ukraine, and that was the plea of Maria Bolinska in her story, Ukraine needs every bit of technology and weapons, including the small things, to push back as hard and as quickly as possible. Otherwise, we're facing a very scary prospect. And I think Ukraine really has to prove itself this summer. And it's going to be, as Ukraine gets closer to victory, it's going to be more difficult than it's ever been since the beginning of the full-scale invasion.
So what is the way that the Ukrainian people understand the meaning of victory in this war? It is supposed to be an obvious thing, just throw Ruskies away out of the territories that belong legally to Ukraine, and that's it. But is that the real possibility right now? Do you think that the troops that are gathered, the troops that are used for this counter-offensive, and the troops that Russia has on the opposite side of the contact line, in your opinion, or based on the opinion of the people that you talk to in Ukraine, are we talking about the scenario of possible throwing away all the Russian and related to Russia troops from territory that legally belongs to Ukraine?
Well, that's what has to happen, including Ukraine taking Crimea. Ukraine knows that full well. If they don't take back Crimea, this is not going to be over. Most people in Washington do not like this idea. Even Americans who come here, they don't want to think about this idea. It's unpleasant to them, but it's a reality. As far as the current sorry, it's hard for me to hear. As far as the current logistics of what's happening, we don't know, Michał. We're not going to know a lot. We just know, and then that's it. I mean, everyone here, loose lips sink ships. Even though we're not dealing with ships here so much, but everyone here realizes that this counteroffensive must inherently be slow and methodical, but Ukraine has to push back and take Crimea, and that's the only way this ends. Some people think that could be a very long time, but whatever it is, it's the only way out of this hell that Russia has currently forced it upon Ukraine, unless something changes internally within Russia.
Joe, there's another question, because when we move back to the days or even months before Russia rolled its tanks through the Ukrainian borders, we remember that there were weeks and months of massing the troops along those borders and kind of a political messaging to the West that the proposal that Russia is offering to the West is coming back to the status quo ante from the times when the Soviet Union was collapsing. So that NATO is on the positions of states of an old NATO before the Cold War ended, and Russia comes back to its sphere of influence from the days when from the days of the final days of the Soviet Union. That means that what is known as Eastern NATO flank right now would be abandoned, and that means that Ukraine will come back to the Russian sphere of influence. This was the very beginning of this war. Do you think that the Russians changed their negotiation position, that they changed the way they are thinking about the great strategic picture of this war?
I don't know. It's hard to know. I mean, I think, looking at, Putin is, as a psychopath, I would think, or a sociopath. I'm not sure which, but, I think he's probably enjoying this a bit. The world is terrified of him. And, Ukraine has proved a tougher opponent, but he's got control over his people. And, I think, we're dealing with a crazy person here. And so we have to realize that. And at the same time, though, we got to remember, everyone that joined NATO, the Eastern European countries, they did it because they didn't want to be in a situation like Ukraine is in right now. That's it. It's a simple thing. It's not NATO expanding. It's people wanting protection. But now I think, when there is victory, Ukraine, as the largest country in Europe, is going to, have one of the best militaries in the world. And as President Zelensky said, maybe there is not even a need for NATO, in this future. I mean, it really will. And I think that people have, we have to really think about it. But when Ukraine has victory, you will have this amazing democracy that has an incredible army that can maybe defend other countries around the world. And it really can change the global security architecture like we can't even imagine right now. And Ukraine will be stronger than NATO in a sense.
Joe, my final question is the question of what Dmitry Peskov said. We know that those guys are a bunch of morons. That's for sure. Those are psychopaths. That's for sure, no doubt about it. And burglars or people who steal just great amounts of money. That's obvious. But what does Dmitry Peskov mean when he says that the operation of demilitarization of Ukraine is actually over? I mean, Ukraine is far more powerful right now, even if it's losing lots of its best citizens in the front lines. And you cannot say that this is a country which is demilitarized. It actually got lots of Western-made weapons. What the hell are they thinking about? I think maybe there's, again, we never want to be complacent, but maybe there is some panic in elements. Certainly, there's some panic in the Kremlin, but we have to remember Russia. I was hell bent on destroying Ukraine because they want to destroy free people. They don't believe Ukraine has a right to exist, just like Beijing is with Taiwan. And Russia is going to get nastier and nastier, which is hard to believe, Michał, because they've been so awful and so genocidal. But they're going to get nastier unless something really magically changes in the Kremlin. And so the rhetoric is going to get more intense. But I think Russian actions, like the destruction of that dam, they got other things like that planned, I'm sure. I don't know, Joe, if any change in the Kremlin may change the situation. Changing of perhaps Kremlin, or actually dismantling of this whole entity which is called Russia, who knows? Joe, we gotta go.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, what really is needed is a change in the minds and the hearts of Russian people, because they do permit this to happen.
And that's tough. Joe Lindsley, see you next week, and we are waiting for the pictures of the car. Bye.
Great. And if anyone wants to support drones, please, UkrainianFreedomNews.com. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this show comes back tomorrow. See you soon.